Welcome, everybody. I'm Judge Dave Larson, and we're here tonight to have a discussion about domestic violence during Domestic Violence Awareness Month. And I'm just going to keep my comments brief. I'm going to introduce the folks in just a moment. But really what the goal is, I think, is for those folks in the audience and also on TV and watching online to kind of recognize the signs of domestic violence, the signs in yourself, potentially, or the signs in your loved ones, so you can deal with them in advance. We just had a recent tragedy in Federal Way with the stabbing, and in talking with that person who's not in my court, what ends up happening is love kind of clouds your judgment on the signs until it's too late sometimes. And so the hope here is that people will recognize signs of domestic violence and go get treatment before they're ever charged with a crime, or encourage their loved ones to go get that treatment before that happens, before they're a victim. So what I'm going to do first is turn it over to Mayor Farrell, who's going to give some remarks. And Mayor Farrell, the thing he has over all the rest of us, he's a domestic violence prosecutor. So thank you, Mayor Farrell.
Thank you very much. Well, thank you very much for coming tonight. In fact, actually, I spent 16 years in the King County Prosecutor's Office, and I would say half of the time I was there was centered on domestic violence work. In fact, Yarden Weidenfeld, Yarden, can you raise your hand? He and I actually met when I was the supervisor of the King County Domestic Violence Court Unit at the Prosecutor's Office. And I have to say that the work I did and I love the work I do now, and I promise I'm not going to go on and on, because actually Susan gives me a bad time, because every time I go into a meeting, I at some point bring up, well, you know, as a prosecutor, and Susan now says, oh, really? We haven't heard that. And I think it's because it becomes, you know, like all of us, our experiences become who we are, and we're informed by our experiences, and I'm really proud of that work that we did. And I think if I could boil down my experiences and what I learned from that, is there a few points of wisdom about domestic violence, and it's not so much about the violence as it is about the control. And I think we all recognize that domestic violence is an act of control over another human being, and really one of the things that they desperately try to teach to offenders, if it's possible, is that the only person that you should ever be in control of is yourself. And I think ultimately that's at the very core of it. I was actually just reading the Silhouette over there about the David Brame case, and I thought to myself, I cannot believe it's been 15 years since that happened. And actually just last week, I sat in a hospital room up in Harborview of somebody that, well, many of us know, the local chair of the local Democratic Party, Allison Taylor, who nearly was murdered by her husband. And it's one of those things where it's tragic. Sometimes it's unexpected, many times it's not. And I think that what we can do as a community, as a government, as friends, as members of our community, is be there to be helpful, to hold offenders accountable, and to make sure that we're there to lend a helping hand. And not a judgeful one. I think that one of the things that I found as a young prosecutor, I think I struggled sometimes with the decision on victims to recant. And I think as the longer I got in, and Yard knows this, the longer I did that work, I realized it's complicated. I mean, one of the things that I'm really glad I took some time off between undergraduate and law school, and I wasn't trying to stand in judgment of people, is I just realized the world's complicated. Some things that are not complicated are that people should never live in fear, should never be subjected to violence. But oftentimes as a person, and we have to understand that sometimes people, victims, when they're faced with the reality of cooperating with prosecution and all of that we don't know exactly what their circumstances are. The best we can do is be there to be helpful as a community, to when they're ready to stand up, and to be vigilant for those that we truly believe objectively through solid evidence that we need to hold accountable. And so we're very fortunate to have a dedicated prosecutor here. The advocates do such important work to make sure that our victims are heard, and that we understand that the folks that are really in the firing line are not just the victims, but the children as well, who bear these scars for years and years later. So with that, I want to say thank you so much for coming. Thank you for participating. And my door is always open to talk about these issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Farrell. Thank you. The next person I'm going to introduce is Deputy Mayor Susan Honda. She's on the Domestic Violence Task Force locally. Before Deputy Mayor Honda speaks, looking at statistics a couple years ago, everybody's concerned about the dark alley, going down the dark alley and getting assaulted. But at the time, 80% of the people that are experiencing violent crime it's from somebody they know. And that's just something that was kind of shocking for me, even though I'm here day in and day out, that large a percentage. And it's something that attacks the soul in addition to the body. So with no further ado, Mayor Honda, thank you. And Mayor Honda is a very stalwart member of the, Deputy Mayor Honda. Did I say Mayor Honda? Sorry, Mary. But Deputy Mayor Honda is going to speak now. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to thank you all for coming tonight. And I'd like to, if you're a member of the Domestic Violence Task Force here in Federal Way, could you stand up so people can recognize you and say thank you? Come on, stand up. So this group meets on the fourth Friday of the month, and right over here in this room, and we always look for new people who are interested in coming and joining us. I've learned a lot. Can't remember how long I've been going, but it's been a while, and I've learned quite a bit. Tonight when I was asked to talk, I wasn't really sure what I'd talk about because I'm certainly not an expert, and I knew I would be following the mayor, who was a prosecutor for 19 years. So I thought I'd tell a story. About 25 years ago, I met a woman. Her name's Brandy, and she had moved here to Federal Way with 4 little children. Her husband worked in the same area that my husband worked at, and they had no family here. She knew nobody. And I was having a really hard time with understanding why she just didn't leave, because she had these 4 beautiful little kids, and he wasn't just hurting her, but he was hurting them. And one night in January, he locked one of the children outside naked at night. And the next morning, she called and said she was ready and would I help her. And I took her to a friend of mine who was an attorney, and she found out that in this state she could take half of the money in their bank account. So we worked for several weeks with her to get her ready to go somewhere that was safe. And we waited for her husband to go on an out-of-town trip, and he did. And she left. And I didn't know where she was going. I didn't want to know where she was going because I knew that in the months that she had been in this city, I was the only one she was allowed to talk to. And he found her. He came home. He was furious, more furious that she had taken the money than anything else. And he eventually found her. It didn't take him that long, just a week or so. And the last time I talked to her, she had gotten back together with him. And he took another job in another state. And that's what he was doing. He was moving her around whenever anyone got close to her. And I don't know what ever happened to her. You know, I would love to know that she's okay and that her kids are okay. And I really doubt it, because I don't know how you could be okay living like that. And so the people who work in domestic violence, I really admire you, because you see so many awful things, and yet you go back to work every day to help not only the victims, but the people who commit the domestic violence. And I admire you so very much. You will never know how much I admire you all. So, domestic violence can strike anywhere. It's in every neighborhood, in every city. It's here in Federal Way. We have a dedicated group of people in this city. And I just appreciate all that they do to help the victims of domestic violence. So thank you very much. And thank you for being here tonight.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Honda. And next is, I'm going to turn it over the rest of the program to Lana Matthew, who is a domestic violence counselor, and very influential in our community court, very dedicated. And she's going to introduce the rest of the folks for the evening, and I'm going to go sit down. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, good evening, and thank you, Mayor Farrell, Judge Larson. Welcome to our panel speakers, the audience, and any council members that might be here. Tonight really is about a tribute to victims, survivors, and their families whose lives are forever changed in ways that some of us, thankfully, will never know. So many are impacted by domestic violence in the communities. Here in the city of Federal Way, we have a wonderful police department and court personnel. We hold, I don't know if many people know what we do here, the city does for us with domestic violence, but like Susan Honda said, we do have a monthly meeting here for the Federal Way Domestic Violence Task Force. We've created a teen dating violence brochure to meet the needs of teens, but more importantly, we also hold a monthly domestic violence impact panel here at the courthouse. So for the rest of the evening, I'm just going to say DVI. It's an educational piece. I mean, it's not treatment, but it is a good educational piece for majority of people that are court-ordered to attend who only think about domestic violence as physical abuse. We forget about the emotional, the financial, clearly the verbal, the use of children. So for them, it's always been, these are my regular part of my team of speakers, but we're always so grateful that we did the meeting for that night, because oftentimes, without fail, everybody who was so resistant when they first came in had an attitude, but always, without fail, ended up with saying, everybody needs to do this program. Everybody should go through the panel. And it should be longer than 2 hours. You need to have 3 hours at this. So that's always very rewarding for all of us who've done it for a while, to hear that we do make a little impact. We're a little pebble in the water. I'm fortunate because as a counselor, I know victims, I speak to victims, and I'm working with their other halves and their children to kind of put everybody back together if that's their wish. So, what else do I want to say about the panel tonight? So I just want really to say thank you, Mayor Farrell and Judge Larson. You've given us such tremendous support here in Federal Way. I think the city of Federal Way is outstanding, and I'm so fortunate to be living in this city. I can't say enough about how much you guys come around us and let us do when we ask for certain things, that you come around and let us do them. So thank you for that. So tonight's speakers, like I said, they're a part of our regular team. There's a couple more people on our team, but I didn't know that we could get round to everybody. So like the original panel, we can actually ask questions. So audience participation is wonderful. But tonight I'm going to introduce Janet Chance. She was one of the founding members of the panel. So to give us a little bit of history on it, Janet, thank you.
Thank you, Lana, Mayor, Judge Larson, Deputy Mayor. Just a quick minute and a half and give you a background, the hows and whys of the panel, how it came to be. I was a court administrator for about 32 years. During my time as a court administrator, I also acted as a mediator between family members when their contact orders were issued for domestic violence in particular. I would be the one where the parents would come to the courthouse, exchange the kids, exchange the diapers, what have you. Watching the kids, little kids, tears flowing down their eyes, not knowing which way to go. They wanted to stay with mom, they wanted to stay with dad. I thought something needs to change. There's just got to be a better way to stop the madness. A few years after that, a committee of professionals and community members, myself included, Lou Cox, who's the founder and director of the Victim Crime Service in Pierce County, we came together to develop standards for a domestic violence victims impact panel, educate and demonstrate the hurt and damage to families caused by such violence. This committee was made up of representatives from the courts, probation departments, victim advocates, and our police departments. After 2 years of scrutinizing, attending judicial conferences, speaking to judges, reviewing several crime victim programs in the state, explaining our concept. Our first Victims Impact Panel was presented in 1994. It has been great. We have been lasted this long, and I just thank all of our communities for participating and keeping this going. Our panel speakers are comprised of survivor family members, former recovering perpetrators, and others who grew up in a domestic violence in their families. Our audience consists of those who've been at work, doctor appointments, take care of their kids. The feedback, as Lana has said, the feedback that we have received over the past 24 years has been remarkable. An evaluation is asked to be completed by each at the end of the panels. One I will never forget to this day. A gentleman walked up to me, he said, "This panel should be a marriage requirement." I thought, what a concept. If people realize what they're doing to each other and their families through domestic violence, the hurt that not only causes their families, but the communities as well. Hopefully we'll end the cycle of domestic violence one of these days with the continued support of our cities, City of Federal Way, other cities. We do have other panels in other courts throughout the state. We'll hope to end the cycle and the disease of domestic violence. Thank you very much. Lana?
Thank you, Janet. So let me introduce to you then David Stangler. I'm just going to let you tell your story.
Hello, my name is Dave Stangler. Thank you, Judge Larson, Mayor Farrell, and Lana Matthews for the opportunity to be here tonight. It feels good to be on the other side, working with you guys, not against you. Truly grateful to be here tonight and able to speak and tell my story. Honestly, I was going to write something down tonight, but it's better just from my heart. So my story is, addiction, alcoholism, and domestic violence is my story, all of those things. And when I got the opportunity, I'll back up. So a long time ago, 7 years ago, I left my wife and daughter that was 1 year old, got into some addiction issues and got into another relationship while I was still married. And obviously that wasn't going to work out too well. So the relationship became very toxic very fast. And what happened in that is pretty much where I started to figure out what domestic violence was about. And it started with a phone call, and then it escalated very fast to what we heard tonight, which was trying to control and manipulate another human being. And it was very, it kind of took over me, and it was like an adrenaline rush in a lot of ways, and the opportunity that I have today, it's just amazing, like not having to feel like I have to control someone else, because truth is most of the time it's hard enough to get through the day and take care of myself, let alone worrying about what someone else is doing and trying to control that. Long story short, at the end of all of this, I had gotten arrested, I got a charge, there was a kid involved, the yelling and the screaming, to this day, I don't have anything to do with these two people, but to this day, I'm certain the kid remembers the things, and doing this tonight is my opportunity to give back to that situation. That's the only way, because I can't call and I can't continue that unhealthy relationship. So this is an honor tonight, and I truly mean that. This is just like for me in AA. I chair meetings, I try to sponsor people that are willing to step up. So this is really big for me, so thank you. My daughter didn't really get too much affected with those things, besides the fact that I wasn't present. Her mom definitely was affected by that, and again, tonight I get to give back by this, and hopefully, someone else will see this or hear something that'll help them. But in my relationship now with my family, I guess I'll go back to the program. When I got in trouble, I am so grateful that I got to go through this one-year program. I tried to run from it, and I jumped to another facility with an excuse. I tried to get out of it every which way I could. I couldn't run from it. The running was over. You know, it was jail or do the work. So I believe anything in life is about doing the work. What you put in is usually what you get back. If you're not doing the homework and you're not putting forth the effort, you're going to get the minimum back. I believe that. And that's another reason, again, why I'm here tonight. I am uncomfortable. This is scary for me, but I'm here because not just me, others benefit from this. And as far as domestic violence goes, it is not a joke. It is very serious. And it starts with the smallest things, and that's what I got out of this program is each person is their own person. So in a marriage, in a boyfriend-girlfriend relationship, there's me, there's that other significant person, and then there's us. And I didn't understand that until this program. Everyone is entitled to their own opinion, and just because I'm married to someone doesn't mean I own that person, or because she's my girlfriend. That is not my right, that is not my place. And that, I'll be honest, was a tough thing to take on. With some good help and some good understanding. I also learned that in a relationship, it's a two-way thing. When, it's not just about talking and telling someone something, it's about listening. And that was a tough one for me, was being self-centered and selfish, The biggest thing about this is I have a daughter, and she's going to be 8 coming up here in November. And I love my daughter, and I would never want her to go through things that I put other people through, even in the smallest form of calling a name or belittling someone. I thank you guys very much. And as of right now, me and my wife are together. We live in a home together. I've started a heating company. I have several years now sober and clean. My daughter comes to AA with me. And, I work every day to not be the monster I was before, and this program, as long as I'm alive and as long as anyone that's experiencing domestic violence, as long as you're breathing, it doesn't matter if you're in jail, in a hospital, wherever, there is hope. And, you can change. I can change. If you care to do the work, you can change too. So thanks.
Wow, thank you, Dave. Welcome. Tears to my eyes. It's an emotional night. Okay, well, next, Anthony, I'm sorry. Anthony, you're up.
Good evening. My name is Anthony Childs. First and foremost, I want to thank God, because without him, change is not possible. Second, I want to thank Judge Lawson for having us here, and I want to thank Mayor Farrell. Thank you very much for coming and being involved in this. I grew up in the city of New York, on the streets of the Bronx. I had supervision, but I was rowdy, so it was hard to control me and contain me. So when you're growing up in a household with other brothers and sisters, sometimes one gets pushed to the wayside, and so the other ones can be okay. And I was that black sheep. None of my other brothers and sisters have ever been involved with the law on a negative side at all. So I learned in the streets of New York how to be tough, how to be aggressive, how to be selfish, how to be self-centered, how to take what you want, how to be mean and nasty. And I saw nothing wrong with this because this was what was happening in my neighborhood. And as I got older, it progressed. I got bolder in it. And then you get into relationships with people, or you deal with other people, but you still have that aggression, that anger, that low self-esteem, those insecurities, and you take them out on other people. Now, I'm not saying I knew I was doing this, but this is what was happening. And I came to the state, and I had a son in New York. He was 2 years old, and I went to prison. When I came out of prison, he was 18 years old, living in the same city of New York going through the same things that I went through. While in prison, I found God. Started going to church, reading the Bible, started seeing where my wrongs were. So I started trying to correct them. When I came out of prison, I had to do anger management, victim awareness, and I met Lana. And I saw a class. The class was a little rowdy, people. I'm like, well, I'm nothing like these people. I've got it together. And I would do the homework. And one day, I was sitting in my bedroom, and I started reading these pamphlets she gave us. And I actually started reading, and I was like, okay, this one's cool. And I picked up one, I said, whoa, this is me. And I put it down, and I pondered it in my mind. I picked it back up again, and I read it again, and I was like, no, this really is me. You're like, wow. So the next time I went to her class, I actually started paying attention. I actually started participating in the class because I saw something that I needed to fix. Before that, I thought, this is just a class that you go to. You don't really need this. And something on those pages jumped out at me and made me realize that, hey, I still had flaws that I needed to fix. And so I participated more, talked to Lana more, we got along well, and started going to church more, I started changing. And then the funny thing is, I had to actually go and fix my son. I've had many relationships with women over the years, and none of them worked out. It was always, it was her fault. She made me curse at her. She made me mistreat her. She did this. I never said, hey, what about my part? And when I went to Lana's class, I started reading these pamphlets, doing the homework, and actually going back over them again, studying them, and I started seeing things that I can do to correct me. Things I can do to help me better me. Because you can't control anybody, but you can control your side of anything. You can control how you respond, how you react, how not to antagonize, annoy, or agitate a situation. So I became a communicator. I got into a new relationship. Hi, baby. And my relationship now is going wonderful. I mean, all relationships have their up and downs, but we communicate. We talk things out. We don't yell and fight. And one of us sees like the other person's agitated, we back off that person, and we allow that little bit of time for that person to calm down, or we come at a different approach to someone to redirect the anger and the hatred and the bitterness, whatever it is that we're going through. I believe that knowledge is the key to changing a person. A lot of people don't know that they have problems or issues. A lot of people don't know that there are alternatives to the way that they're doing things. They think that the way that they're doing it is okay because they've seen it from somebody else. Most behaviors are learned behaviors, So we have to unlearn those bad things and learn new ways to approach situations, communicate better, talk better. It's like in the Bible it says, when I was a child, I thought of a child, I act like a child. When I became a man, I put away childish things. A lot of people are being led by their emotions, and really that's childish. But they don't know that that's wrong, And I thank Lana for being in that class and having patience with us and actually caring and helping and digging in, because you see somebody, she's not getting paid much, but she actually cares about you. She actually wants you to succeed, and she wants you to help, wants to help you. And I saw that. And once I passed her class, I felt like it was my duty because I've got out of a ditch, and now it's my turn to help somebody else out of a ditch. Now it's your turn to give back to somebody else who is not aware that they have an issue or they have a problem, And I saw a lot of people in the class who can relate to me or I can relate to them. And so me and Lana talked, and she was like, hey, why don't you come to one of the things and talk? You know, at first you're a little reluctant, like, I don't know about talking in front of people, Lana, I'm not sure about that. And I'm like, oh, you'll do fine. You know how Lana is. So I was like, okay, you know, I'll give it a shot. And once I did it, I realized it's not about you anymore. It's about helping someone else to overcome something that they're going through and not necessarily knowing that they're in the wrong. You know, because if I learned the behavior from my big brother or my dad or my uncle, then it's okay because that was somebody I respect or look up to, you know. But now that we have so much information and knowledge, we can flood people with better ways to do things. We can flood people and say, hey, you don't have to bump your head to tie your shoe. All you gotta do is bend down and tie your shoe, you know? Use that as an example. There's people who care. There's programs now that help. You know, there's people who've been through what they've been through and can say, hey, instead of going from A to Z, why don't you go from A to B, you know? And I appreciate Lana for allowing me to come and talk in her classes because it inspires.
Okay, so my next speaker is David.
All right. Thank you, Lana. Thank you, Mayor Furrow and Judge Latson. I really appreciate this opportunity. I think, you know, me and Anthony, I have a similar story. I grew up, you know, in a house where violence was just normal. It was just, you know, my dad, you know, was an alcoholic, and he was, you know, arguing with my mom, beat up my mom. And so you kind of grew up with I grew up with two different thoughts in my mind. One is that I would never become to be like my dad. And second is that it's okay to be violent at the same time. So it's a really weird combination. Never really noticed any of that because I came, again, you know, all the way from Mexico where, you know, the macho thing is well accepted. Went to LA, got caught up in gangs. I was in a survival mode most of my life. And eventually I went to see the system, and I ended up in the system for about 16 years myself. And even within the system, not knowing much or not having any guidance through life, it was all about survival. It was all about having that control that we talked about that never knew in my life that it was actually a wrong thing. It kept me alive for so many years that I actually thought that that was a skill, that was something that I'm supposed to have in order for me to survive. So through the system, you know, I went as a 19-year-old kid, got out at 33, and through the whole time it was survival. So through my time, you know, I found God myself. At one point in my life, I felt like this is the time for me to turn around and start doing different things. You know, I started working on myself, my anger issues. I started working on addiction. I started working on so many different things that I thought I needed in order for me to function out here, because I knew my day was gonna come up. So I thought I had it all. I thought I had it all locked in, and when my time came up, I was glad to get out, glad to be back on the streets. But the things that I learned in prison never really went away. The things that I learned as a kid never really went away. That was an area that I never really put attention to. Everything else, yeah, anger issues, like those second, you know, thought, everything, like questions and ask for help and all of that. And that's what made me being successful out here. I ended up getting a job, you know, helping people out, because that's in my heart. I work with youth at risk, especially the ones that are being cut up in the juvenile justice system, gangs, drugs, and all that stuff. So I thought to myself, you know, I'm in the right path. Then I get into a relationship where it was some challenges from the beginning, but just like I think anybody else thought that I wasn't the problem, right? It's always the other person that has the problems. So I try to deal with it the best that I could, but for the things that I learned in life, it was just going sideways. It wasn't going to get any better. And eventually it got to that point where me and my partner started just arguing so much about pretty much anything and everything you can think of. So at one point I felt like there's no escape. This is it. I'm stuck. Continue trying to work and do what I was called on to do, which is working with youth. But that area, that part of me, I just couldn't resolve it. I didn't know how, to be honest. And eventually I went back to drinking, I went back to using drugs, I went back to do all of that for looking for the escape of my reality, to where eventually it didn't make it any better. Long story short, one day I'm already in the frame mind of like, you know, I'm gonna take off, I'm gonna go. And I tried to talk to my partner about that, but obviously it didn't went well again. It was just a matter of time. It was just like a bomb ready to explode, and eventually did. I got drunk, I came back home, and I felt like the door was locked. I got put out of my own house on the place that I felt like I was paying bills. And my anger, all the things that I learned went out the window. I went back to being 18, 19, and I kicked the door, and I screamed, and I was so pissed off because I felt I was disrespected. I felt so many different things at that time. And eventually got into the house. Eventually I argued with my partner. Eventually the kids got to see us. They got to hear us. Eventually, you know, my partner and me were arguing, and she trying to get on me. And I really want to be specific about the things that happened. There's no shame in the game, but I'm going to tell you why in a little bit. When that went on, I pushed my partner on the bed, and I got on her face, and I told her, this is what you want me to do, and I'm not going to give you the satisfaction. I'm not going to go back to prison, but I'm out of here today. And then out of nowhere, she kicked me, and I slapped her on the leg. Before, it was shoving, grabbing hair, and all of that. So she called the police, and I was still mad. And I was still didn't find no way out. And this is, for me, it was just like, this is it. I'm going back to prison. So my mind started just going different directions. Thankfully, I was able to go. Next thing you know, I find out, you know, I had court, had a warrant for my arrest. I'm a felon. You know, I'm already know like it's going to be bad for me. But you know what, in life, one of the things that make me function the way that I function out here is taking that responsibility to what I do. I'm end up to the things, to the good things and the bad things that I do. So it was no mistake. I went to court, turned myself in. I want to resolve this. I came back to my senses. I'm not drunk no more. I'm like, what the hell did I just did? I got to do something better. Eventually, you know, they put me to court, and here we go to the process and everything. I got to the point that I was like, I've been in the system all my life. So what I literally got tired of going to court because it was messing up my work, and I didn't want to lose that. But I said to myself, if this is going to happen, it's going to happen now. So I walked up to the judge, and I said, you know what? Let's just end it right now. What is it that you want from me? You want me to get locked up? Here I am. What is it for me? It's like, well, it's up to the prosecutor. We talked it out. It's treatment, suspended sentence for whatever time until I finish my treatment. So I was like, all right, cool. At least I can continue working. That was my thinking at that time. So I go to different agencies, and just like these guys are saying, you know, I run up to Lana. It really was a blessing to run up to her, not because she's here. I would say that at any given time. And I always believe that things happen for their own reasons. And so, because I went to different places, and it just, when I got to her office, it was just something different. And like any other situation with myself, I wanted to allow myself now. I knew that was an area that I never worked on. I spent time impounding on myself, like, what did I do? You know, now I have to go back to the system and all of that stuff. So I talked to Lana. She explained the program. This is how it works. This is how it's going to be. You got to be here every week. You got to do all this. I was open-minded to it. I wasn't too resistant, even though when I started, that I'm really grateful for today during the class, during the whole program, is that it let me really look back for me to understand why is it that I was acting the way that I was. And unfortunately, people had to pay the price without even having nothing to do with it. And so, and believe me when I say, like, I was literally asking Lana so many questions, like, what do you mean? Hold up. What are you telling me? That you okay disrespecting me, but I can't say nothing back? Yeah. I was like, no. Because then again, the survival, the mentality, the thoughts that I had before, it's like, you're not supposed to accept that. So the program, she helped me basically to go back to my dad, how I was growing up, my lifestyle, and really identify the belief system that I grew up with that was fake. They got me not only in this situation, but it got me into all these other situations, growing up. So for me, it was real. For me, it was the time for me to say, you know what? I never worked on this area of my life, and I have to put in the work, and I have to put in the time in order for me to get better. So I finished the program, I finished it all. And then after that, still continue having, contact with Lana, because now I'm part of the panel that happens here in Federal Way. And Intrepid for the guys, they speak Spanish. It's my first language. But I do that not only because I want to help, it keeps me focused. And then the first time that I went to the panel that I wasn't required to go, but that was the beginning of me being an interpreter, I seen the videos, and again, it hit me right in my face. Those videos were so real that I'm like, how many times we were at that point? And thankfully, it was just this, which it wasn't really good, but it could have gotten so much worse. And then it just opened up another view in my mind. And even friends that I have, they still have some of those beliefs. I'd be like, bro, did you know that you're not even supposed to do that, bro? Like, did you know that you're not even supposed to act this way? Did you know? Like, for me, it was all new. After I felt like, I had the knowledge, to be better, to understand the control issues and all, I grew up in prison, so it was always about controlling and being respected and never be disrespected. So that was the biggest challenges that I have in my relationship. It wasn't really because she was cheating or she was, at the end of the day, it was me. Once I understood that part, and I took some time away from my partner to understand myself, to work on myself, to continue doing what I'm doing, allowed me to identify so many issues that I have myself. Once I worked through them, I didn't went to another relationship. I didn't went to start something new. I challenged myself to go back to my same relationship. I went back to my girlfriend, which is here today, and I went to apologize. And because me and Lana also had talks about our kids, you have 2 daughters. My son right here, he was present when that went on. And I'm able now to come back and take full responsibility for what I did and promise, not to them, but to my own self, that I will never, ever put myself in that position, because most of the times I was trying to control the other person to be the way that I wanted it to be. But I understand that that's not it. For me, now I have that so clear that it's like, as long as I work with myself, because I did love her, it's just some misinformation that I always grew up with that led me to that event. Today, once again, I finished the program, I interpret for the panel, and I'm always glad to go to that panel. I'm back together with my girl and the family. We just bought a house in Federal Way. Now we have a totally different understanding about, our relationship. And that's not it, right? It's a work in progress. And every day, just like you were saying earlier, when we see something going on, now we know how to act towards each other before it gets out of hand. And today, it's a good opportunity for me to express that, not just to them, but in public, in front of them, as to how bad that was and how sorry I am for doing what I did. But then there is a chance, right? And I always believe in second chances, because I've been given second chances all my life. And today, just like David was mentioning earlier, maybe help somebody else that is going through something, that's seen the signs. I never even knew the red flags until, Lana would talk so much about the red flags, and going back to my relationship, it's like, wait a minute, there was so many of them. And anyway, so I'm not going to take more time for it, but I really appreciate that opportunity. Thank you for listening, and I appreciate you guys. Thank you.
Hey, thank you, David. All inspiring. You're wonderful. Okay, so our last speaker is Kathy, my dear friend Kathy. All yours.
Hi, thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Judge. Thank you, Lana. I appreciate the fact that everybody's here today. My story is a little bit different because I'm kind of on the other side. 6 years ago, here in a couple of days, my daughter was murdered by domestic violence. She was stabbed 30 times, and when I found her, she was bled completely out. So domestic violence does go that far, and it does create a lot of different aspects to the kids, because she left behind 2 kids that I am now raising. When when this took effect, it happened when the youngest one was 9, girl. The other one was 12, also a girl. Mom was their life, and now that life has totally changed. The oldest one kind of went through her little spat, and she wanted to just be left alone. She wanted to grieve in her own way, which I allowed her to do. Most people grieve differently. My youngest granddaughter went through the other aspect, and she reached out and just got angry at everybody. She couldn't understand why this man that she called Dad for 5 years could take her mom away. The day that he took her, he also took away me as a grandmother. And their dad signed over custody to me because he knew that it'd be best. So in one day, she lost her whole world. She lost a grandmother that was the fun one. She lost a mom that was a loving one. She lost a dad that she thought loved them. And she lost her biological dad, all in one day. All because of one person with his choices. His choices, my daughter's choices. My daughter's choice was to stay with him. And it was a choice that nobody could change. That was her choice. Didn't matter what anybody said, because, like Lana said, love steps in the way. And she loved this guy to no end. And she thought she could change him. And she really thought that she could do everything to make him better. Well, he wasn't ready to change. Definitely wasn't ready to change. And when you think that he could just take a life like that, and he ran, an hour later they found him, totally bloody, at a bus stop. And when we ended up in court, they asked me what I wanted to do, because the girls were too young to make the decision. So it was either go for life, which is 15 years, and they can parole in 10. Or we could go for premeditation and let the judge decide what they wanted to give him. Well, he wanted to do the insanity plea because that would give him 1 year, and then he could possibly get out. And it would be just out on the street. But my daughter put him in prison for a year, put him in jail for a year before this happened. And in that year's time, he wrote letters to her from jail that said he was going to kill her. Well, all those letters came out of jail. So how did they get out of jail when there's a restraining order? Well, domestic violence is domestic violence, and love is love. They find a way. So, all in all, now my granddaughters are 18 and 15. The youngest one has been in and out of court. She has been on a run petition. She has been on a youth petition. She has been involved in drugs and alcohol. She's got her 3rd charge of assault because she's so angry. And there's the programs that are out there for kids. They need to be changed because kids need to do the programs. And when a child turns 13 and says, I don't have to do this, well, yes, they do. Because you know what? At 13, she wasn't capable of making those decisions. And now, because she says she doesn't have to do it, So now I have to deal with all the court stuff, and I have to deal with everything because she is so angry and she refuses to get any help because she doesn't have to. Well, that's not fair to anybody. Definitely not fair to her. You know, when I found my daughter, it will be 6 years the day before Halloween. So this is a really rough month, especially when it comes to Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and this is the month that he took her. He'd only been out of jail for 2 weeks. Just let out. No supervision, no nothing. Even with a restraining order, he still found her and done this to her. And it's sad that domestic violence has to go this far. But it is a reality. It is a reality. And I'm not saying my daughter was perfect because you know what? Domestic violence is a two-way thing. The arguments, both-sided. They both ended up in jail on my granddaughter's first birthday. Her dad, their dad, and my daughter. She got out of that domestic violence situation and got into another one. And this one took her life. So my granddaughters have seen everything from the very beginning of domestic violence. They've watched the arguments of their dad and their so-called stepdad. And they've watched the arguments, they've watched the throwing down the stairs, they've watched the hitting, the punching, the hitting with baseball bats, running down the street screaming. And they watched the whole thing. And I'm just glad that they weren't there the day that I found her, because that would not have been a pretty sight. But it comes down to the fact that everybody makes choices. And just like these guys, they've made the choice to change. But you can't make them change. You can only take care of yourself, and you can only change yourself. And I just hope that this program, I work with Lana because I feel the panel is very important. It's a very important part. Because if I can tell my story about losing my daughter, and one person takes that and goes with it and says, I'm never going to go that way, I feel that I've done my part. And out of everybody that goes to that class, that panel, I'll tell you, we get some nice reviews. We get some that say, oh yeah, I was just here because I was made to be here. Well, that's not true, because they did learn something out of it. They may not want to tell you that right now, but I think everybody does learn. And I just think that this program needs to continue, because domestic violence needs to be put out there, and it needs to be more aware of. Thank you.
Okay, so like our panel, when we do it, does anybody have questions? Nobody has questions? Well,
I do.
yes, thank you.
Lana, could you talk about the red flags, or you have your panelists talk about the red flags that were mentioned, the kind of the telltale signs that there may be an issue that needs to be addressed?
Sure. I think for everybody on the panel, the red sign was a little different for each one of them. But basically, I think any time that we are in a relationship, there is a little part of us that just says, this isn't right. I can't do this anymore, but yet I keep on staying. That is a red flag to you, that something needs to change. When we're arguing too much, like I've always said, coming to a program for domestic violence, anger management, it's not going to get rid of anger in your life. But there's a big difference between being angry and being in a rage. If we're arguing too much and we're yelling, cussing, and being physical, that is a big red flag. when you're being told what you can and cannot do, that is a red flag. When people are withholding your finances from you, not allowing you to have a vehicle, a means of transportation, but rather, don't worry about it, honey, I can pick that up on the way home. I can take you to work. We can't afford another vehicle, so just let me take you wherever you need to go. That is another big red flag. There are so many, I listened to Kathy's story, and it's very emotional because Tricia was my friend. She was a co-worker for us. I've had family members who have died in domestic violence. And I'm so proud of the speakers tonight because they've actually dared to sit here, confront, and talk to the prior victims and made sincere, heartfelt apologies, and their life for many years now have gone. This is change. For those who say that domestic violence treatment doesn't work, well, I'm here to say differently. If we don't have treatment, what is the alternative? What is the alternative? For people to just keep on going? It doesn't work for everybody. Like everything, we all have to be ready. We have to be ready to leave our job. We have to be ready to retire. We have to be ready for whatever comes next. For those who are ready, it is our obligation in life to give everyone an opportunity to have treatment, to make the change, to help you make the changes. So, if anybody is there's crisis lines you can call. Everybody can access me everywhere. If anybody wants to join the Domestic Violence Task Force in Federal Way, we welcome you. And again, I just want to say thank you, Mayor Farrell, Judge Larson. Your support to this cause, this disease that's out there is huge. And I know against all kinds of budget cuts and this and that, I am standing here to tell you we cannot lose the Domestic Violence Impact Panel. We cannot lose that.
Well, Lana, you're not going to get off that easy because there's some more questions, and yours truly. So it's for the panel, too. Basically, what we've heard is kind of a cycle. We witnessed it as youth, and in Federal Way, I think in part because of, large part because of Mayor Farrell and the council members, we're one of the few communities that has, where it's a gross misdemeanor with a mandatory minimum 30 days of confinement if somebody commits domestic violence in the presence of a child. Okay, the learned behavior that the gentleman spoke of. How important is it for somebody that maybe is as a child that hasn't got into a relationship yet, or is starting a relationship, that may have been a witness to domestic violence as a child? How important is it to kind of nip it in the bud and get there, do the things you did after you've made the mistakes, but do it before? How important is that? And how important would that have been for you as individuals?
Like I said, my son was 2 years old when I went to prison. He lived with his mother, and apparently she was in relationships that were abusive. And over the years, when I've been able to call him and talk to him on the phone, like, hey, how's your mom doing? How you been? How's everything? Did you get the pictures I sent you, whatever? And he would tell me, oh, my mom's fine. Her and her boyfriend had a fight. But it's okay. She was fighting back. He's 6, 7 years old. And this is what he's telling me over the telephone. And I'm in prison, and there's nothing I can do about it. And over the years, you forget these things. And when I came out of prison, from him being a witness of his mother in these situations and these relationships, he developed these habits also. He was demeaning to his girlfriend. He was yelling. He was kind of bullying her. He'd grab her up. And I saw where he was going, you know what I mean? Like, okay, you're doing this. This is the beginning stages of prison, because you think it's okay to demeanor people. You think it's okay to put people down, and you think it's okay to grab people up. I didn't hit her, I grabbed her, you know? And I went to New York, and I was in New York for maybe 2 months. And every day I would talk to him. And every day I would tell him, yo, listen, that is not the right way to do things. That is not the right way to do. Well, I lived here, so I'd have to come back home. And his mom would call me, and I'd hear stories. And I'd fly back to New York, and, you know, and there was a moment there where I thought, my son's gonna go to prison. My son's gonna follow in my footsteps because I wasn't there to guide him and direct him. But I didn't give up. I kept talking to him. I kept telling him, listen, what you're doing is wrong. You're supposed to protect your mother. You're supposed to protect your sister. You're supposed to be somebody to protect your girlfriend. You know, you're not supposed to put your hands on them. You're not supposed to talk to them that way. You're supposed to be, you love them, then you talk to them in love. And over time, it actually clicked in for him. It actually started working. He started understanding the concept of it. And then one day I looked up and he had a job. He got a car. He said, Dad, I don't need to be in a relationship at this moment because I'm working on myself. And over the phone, I cried. Like, what did you just, I didn't say nothing to him, but I was in my mind like, what did you just say to me? Like, yes, you know? And so children being around it, seeing it on a daily basis, they start, at first they're horrified by it. After a while, they start accepting it. And then over more time, they start doing it. They emulate what they see. Because after the arguments and the fights, the mom and dad doesn't say, baby, what happened is not okay. You know, daddy's just going through it, or mommy's just, no, we don't say anything. We deal with the other adult that we went through the situation with, and we shoo the kids away. But kids are inquisitive. They want to know what's going on. They're nosy. They're busybodies. So they see here more than we think they see and hear, or they retain more than what we think they retain. And like I said, eventually they emulate that. You know, so it is very important to have a program for kids to help kids, and it's very important for us to talk to kids and help them know that that was wrong, that shouldn't happen, and it shouldn't happen anymore.
Yes, sir.
I think for me, one of the things that like I mentioned before, I grew up in it and I had no guidance to it. After the events that happened in my house and after, everything I've gone through the program, I made it really intentional to get to my daughters to make sure on a one-on-one by ourselves for them to, because I remember that night that they were scared, like they couldn't really understand what was going on. But one thing, that I was the aggressor and that I was totally out of line. So I didn't want it to excuse myself for my actions, but rather to explain that the time that I spent away was to work on myself for those events not to ever happen again. And really, I don't know how much that is going to help. I don't think it's just one talk that you can give and resolve. I think, one thing that like I said, I challenged myself to, I work with kids 24/7, and when this happened, I was ashamed because I'm preaching something that I actually did myself, like not to be aggressive, to be respectful, to take care of your family, but not so much on like you have to protect on fighting or shooting or doing those things, but how to learn to protect yourself and put your family not at risk in any kind of way. So when this happened to me, I was really ashamed for my work at one point. But then with my daughters, it gave me the opportunity to humble myself and accept what I did. And I think they received that in a different way than me just trying to be like, well, your mom was this or your mom was that. It was just more about, and that came from the treatment. That came for taking responsibility for my own actions. I can never even speak on someone else's actions. And I think that was a good way to start up the conversation. And then again, as every day, every week, every month, on and off, you know what I mean? I'd rather to show, you know, that we're not gonna get there.
In other words, you're going to model the behavior you should have modeled in the
Modeling,
first
yeah.
place, yeah.
Exactly,
And that modeling is going to have the opposite impact that it would have
right,
had you continued in your patterns.
yes.
Okay, how about you, David?
Yeah, I say it's definitely extremely important. If the question is kind of about domestic violence and children and whether, you know, you were charged with domestic violence and kids were present, huge on the kids as children. They're sponges. Everything I believe they take in a lot more than we would ever even know. I know I carry stuff with me as a kid that probably has molded me into the person I became, and that's kind of what I work to change today. But maybe an idea for something like that would be, you know, anyone convicted of domestic violence, part of restitution would be pay for counseling for the child. Maybe that's part of punishment or something, you know, would be a good idea. And then the other parents responsible to attend those meetings and make sure that the kid gets proper counseling. Maybe a good idea, so.
Thank you. Lana, if somebody came in and never been charged with a crime, never had involvement with police, but said, I think I got a problem. I want to change the way, just like these gentlemen did, change their life. I want to change my life because I'm an abuser. And I'm not court ordered. I just want to come here and I want to heal myself. What would you do? Is that possible for somebody to do that?
Absolutely, it's possible. I mean, for someone to just voluntarily just want to get help is huge for me. So we would go through, I would try to work out if he's ready to kind of make the commitment, you know, to do this. And then, of course, most everybody wants to change because they have children. Most everybody that I've ever come across in 20 years of counseling, they love their children. That's without a shadow of a doubt. They've just never really thought about the impact of what their kids, how children process information about what they see and hear. You know, they kind of equate it like it's an adult, but it's not. So I'm always applauding people that come back to class after they're done with the program and continue on with class. I think I had a guy who once told me that, hey, you know, I'm here, this is my second year now after completion, because you can never learn enough about life, and I'm still learning. And he's working on healing his family, which is traumatic because his son has run away and is so angry with him because of what's happened. So, you know, there's so much help out here for everybody or anyone who's seeking help. As counselors, we're always available to help anyone who calls, you know, and just says, I need some help with this, that, and the other. I would do my utmost best to find the right resources for them. I see firsthand with Kathy's granddaughter how it has impacted her, the 15-year-old, who is so in pain and acts out in anger. And that's what children do. They act out because they're in so much pain internally. They don't know what else to do.
Thank you, sir.
I wanted to just make a comment when I was doing treatment with Lana. When I say I was like shocked with the information I was getting, I talked to one of my friends, a real close friend of mine, and I was like, bro, like, you know, I'm learning so much, and this, you know, trying to put things together to the point where he actually was like, you know what, I need to go before I find myself in that position. And then I brought him over, and then he sat there for a couple of sessions. Mm-hmm. But one thing that I remember about that, he was in the moment, he was like, yeah, man, because he had the same beliefs. But then Lana mentioned something at that time, like not everybody is ready to change until it happens, and that's sadly enough to know that's the truth, you know.
And that's the sad. That's why I asked the question, because the pain I see as a judge, I just soon not see.
Yeah.
I suggest people deal with it in advance, rather than having to come here.
Yeah.
But your guys are proof that redemption is real. And Kathy, I know you have something to say, but I want to say that I admire you more than you could even imagine. Your daughter's life means something to me, even though I've never met her. And it means something to me in a lot of ways. But I'll let you make your comment, but I want you to think of how you could explain to folks, because you mentioned kind of the cycle that your daughter went through. What were the warning signs that were being ignored? What were the signs that all along, that everybody else saw that she couldn't see? And the purpose of asking that question is for a potential victim that's out there listening. What can they see that maybe can get them in a position where they can either get the person to redeem themselves, like these gentlemen did, or to extricate themselves from that relationship before it gets to a point where they are a victim. And I hope that's not too much to ask, but first you had your hand up, but I go ahead and say what you want to say and then respond to that.
Yes, the main thing is there needs to be more programs for kids that have been through the domestic violence, because my grandkids have seen so much. And they remember things that I didn't even know that they knew, because they're sponges at young ages. And so with the 15-year-old, she's just kind of grabbed everything, and her only way out is to burst. And so she does have 3 different assault charges now because of her outbreaks of the anger that she has. And the signs, the signs have been there for a long time. My daughter seemed to like the bad boys, I guess. The first one, she thought she could control him. He was younger than her, the kid's dad. But when he got to the age where he wasn't going to be controlled anymore is when it started getting more of the hitting and the throwing and the verbal. Well, when the grandkids see the verbal and they see the red flags of, hey, my mom's being hurt, get on his back and kick him or do whatever you have to do to get him off of mom. Well, they knew the red flags, but my daughter also was being completely away from family. She was not spending time with us anymore, and it was all about being confined to him. It was just, everything was based around him. It was never family orientated anymore. He kept her away from the family as much as he could. When they only had one car, he would take the car. Even though he had no license, he'd still take the car, just so she couldn't go anywhere. She lived far enough away from us where it wasn't like she could just jump in a car and come to see us. When everything started going sour with the second one, it started out with the verbal, with both of them verbalizing each other. And the signs were there for a long time. If you start out with just a little argument, and that argument gets to an argument where one is doubling up their fist and just, you can see that they're mad and they're not walking away, that is a big red sign. But, again, love takes part in a lot of this. Because with domestic violence, you're not seeing the fact that they're keeping you from your family, that they're treating you like this. You're not seeing any of that, because all what you're seeing is that love that you have for them that wants to continue to be a family, whether it's for the financial reason, for the love reason, who knows. But I was in domestic violence when I was married also, and I got out of it the first time I was hit. But my daughter just kept saying that she could fix everybody.
Do you think, and when I looked last, it was 80% men that were the defendants and 20% women, so it's not all men that are the defendants in domestic violence cases. But do you think women that are victims learn from their mothers that are victims also, just like, in other words, that's the way men are supposed to act, and so that they tolerate it? I mean,
Well, I got out of my relationship with their dad when the kids were very young, and he hit me one time, and I was done. Job, and she couldn't get out there and do anything. She couldn't meet anybody. But my daughter was pretty strong-willed, and she went to work, but she kept a lot of it in, until the signs kept coming up that she was in the hospital for this, and she was in the hospital for this, and the aid unit took her from DSHS one day, and that's when he went to jail.
So she didn't leave the first time?
No.
Any other questions from I tried to prime the pump, so I got a mic here. I feel like Phil Donahue, but,
So every once in a while, I end up getting these texts in the middle of the night from people that have, been beat up and it's when you're not trained and you say, okay, call the Dawn hotline, first call the police department, call the Dawn hotline, and you kind of feel like you're doing nothing, and it's like, and these are not people that I'm close to. One of them just happened to be my mentee's mom, and she trusts me, and stuff. And it's like, I can say all I want, but I can't make anything be different. I've suggested she move. I've done, she doesn't want to leave her job. She's Latino, and me no Espanol, so it's like she speaks perfect English, but it's like, and I don't know any of her, she doesn't have any of her other family here. So it's like, I feel like I'm kind of stuck sometimes because, the first time it's like, oh, well, maybe it won't happen again. But, her car's been completely wrecked and vandalized. She's had these arguments and being beat, in her home. And it's 5 people in a 1-bedroom house. So it's like, I've been kind of like keeping this in for her forever. But it's like, I can't force this woman to do anything different. I wouldn't even know what to do. So, I'm looking for suggestions here because I've kind of just let it cook for a while. I haven't talked to her. She hasn't texted me or anything. But it's like, I don't want to beat a dead horse, but I don't want her to be dead or her kids. And her kids are, her oldest daughter's already doing the whole, I'm going to run away, or I have run away, did all these things. And I feel like I'm failing them, but I don't even know what to do. So,
Okay, so you're not failing anyone because first off, there's a relationship going on here in that she trusts you because she reached out to you. It's difficult because we want to go in there and rescue and help somebody and move them out of the situation. I think the best information I could say to you would be this. Be a part of a bigger program. Be a part of the task force. Be a part of maybe Dawn or the Y, whoever the agency is. Learn more. And so it's sometimes not necessarily that they need to hear from you or me because everybody knows what they need to do, but they just need a segue to say that if I call you when I'm ready, you will have some information. So you're doing a great job because, like I say, she reached out to you. She didn't reach out to me. She didn't reach out to 911, and she didn't reach out to Dawn, probably.
no, she did call 911. There is actually,
Okay,
there is a couple
Right.
police reports with their names on it.
right.
I can tell you what not to do. A lot of people that aren't trained in domestic violence, they want people to get couples counseling. And so
Oh.
what that does is it
Yes.
blames the as I thought I heard, it's the relationship. It blames the relationship, not the individual doing the harm. That's the first thing that's a problem. Anger management, because you think it's an anger issue. Anger management typically teaches you what triggers you. So basically that reinforces that it's the other person's fault because you're triggering me, and that's why I'm angry, right? So the type of treatment Lana does, and that's why we order people to get domestic violence treatment, is it focuses on those power and control issues. It focuses on the real issues that ultimately led to these gentlemen actually trying to change lives of people that are in that pattern. So that's what it tries to do. So the worst thing that could happen is try to get, and working with the ministry, we've worked locally with pastors because the tendency is you want to keep marriages together. You want to keep relationships together. Right, and the thing is that trying to get people to understand on some of the dynamics are significant. And if you don't understand those and you start telling your friends, go to get anger management, or it's about anger and you're making them angry, or those kind of things, you're actually perpetuating some of the issues that could ultimately lead to the situation that Kathy had to face and her daughter had to face. Any other questions? Yes. Betty.
So I was going to say that in everything, I know there's a root cause for everything, and I deal with the disability community a lot, and I see a lot of young people with like ADHD, bipolar, autism, Asperger's. Now these young kids, they are so angry because they don't want to be that way. They're so angry because they want to be normal. And so because of that, it causes them to act out in ways that they sometimes have no control over because of the disability. So a lot of times it's the disability that's really causing them to act out. So then it's really important to make sure that those kids and teenagers get counseling while they're young, because it's really important to stay on top of stuff like that, because it can take root and it can grow even up in their adult lives, and it can really cause problems.
Comments from the panel or from Lana?
Yeah, and on the children thing, I mean, we've been working so hard for a few years now on the task force to kind of make some inroads into the schools to talk to the teenagers. I mean, so for a lot of rules and regulations, we haven't been able to get into the school, but we've done the next second best, which is create a teen dating violence brochure to kind of give them some help too. But teens, kids, they will become the adults. They learn what they see and hear. So if we can reach the kids, then it's going to be an awesome world.
Anybody on the panel want to comment? Because I got a follow-up to what Betty said, which is basically the mental illness issues, and everyone, if anybody didn't notice, there was a pattern also. Addiction, alcoholism, or alcohol abuse. When in court, it's a common denominator. It's part of our what's called the DV supplement that's filled out to see if alcohol or drugs was involved, and it's almost invariably a contributing factor. And so whether it's inhibitions get lowered or you end up the mind is altered in some way by the substances, how much of a role do those play? And in addition to the mental illness issues, and I say mental illness could be depression, could be bipolar, could be any number of things. David?
Yeah, as far as addiction goes, yes, I made multiple bad choices, not just DV, but speaking on DV, yes, that's when I did catch my charge. None of any choice in my life until I got sober made any sense at all. Everything was on how I used to deal with life was drugs and alcohol. That was it. Life got lifey and I got drunk or high, and that's how I dealt with it. So starting at 15 and going till 30 some odd years old, I would say there's definitely some mental illness involved there for sure. Not just as I did, and there's no reason to have to use my hands ever for any reason or treat people unfair. So.
Thank you. Any other panelists want to address that particular issue?
Well, my daughter also had a drug thing too. She also was into drinking and drugging, and so was he. So the pattern does continue. And now her 15-year-old is into drugs and alcohol, and the 18-year-old is into marijuana. But someday they will maybe get out of it. They were in counseling, and it worked for a while. But now it's like the 15-year-old says she doesn't have to go, so she's not going to go. 18-year-old's decided she needs to go back because she feels that she needs it now, and she's ready. And so hopefully she'll get back into it and make her way back to being the good kid.
Well, thank you very much. Any other questions, or Mayor or Deputy Mayor want to say any parting words? And then Lana also I'll let Lana close out the whole evening.
I just want to say thank you very much for your candor, for sharing your experience. It was fascinating hearing, the progression. We're all on we all have a story. We all have our arcs in life, and it is sometimes we find ourselves in situations and we ask ourselves, how did we get here? And so it is really encouraging to hear your life stories and what you're doing. And thank you so much for what you're doing for your granddaughters. And I'm sure your daughter would, if she were here today, she'd say thank you. So thank you so much for what you do. And it takes a lot of courage. One of the hardest things to do in life sometimes is admit you're wrong and admit that I've got to change. And that's a really hard thing to do. And so I've been really inspired by your courage tonight. Thank you so much. And for everybody here, thank you.
And I'm going to echo the mayor's comments. Gentlemen, if we could figure out a way to clone you to help everybody that is facing these kind of issues, we'd be a lot farther ahead than we are. And it's just getting people, I'm passionate for trying to get people to not ever come to the system. My motto is no repeat customers. And I run a repair shop, not a junkyard, for a reason. I don't, but to me, if we're keeping people away from the courts, putting ourselves out of business because of the impacts we have on others to stop crime in the first place, that's where we need to go. And you guys are all contributing to that, and I very much appreciate that. So, excuse me, one thing I have really blown, because Bill came in after I made my comments, is we're in the presence of Bill Fuller, who's on the South King Fire Commissioner. He's a South King Fire Jim Fosso, excuse me. Bill RSVP'd, so this is Jim Fosso.
Yeah, so I had 4 years in the U.S. Marine Corps in the Vietnam War. And how do you deal with both men and women that come back from war and they're dealing with their issues they had as participants? When they come back to society, there's a lot of drugs and alcohol. And how do they fit into this picture? Because, in order to get help, I also had 31 years in the Seattle Fire Department, so I spent a lot of time after the fact, after a young woman had been beaten by her husband or shot or stabbed or whatever, after the scene was secured by the police. And a lot of times those were incidents that involved alcohol. But specifically to the veteran, is there something that's helpful for them? I know the judge deals with that.
Well, first of all, my apologies, like double embarrassment. Didn't introduce him and then got his name wrong. Because Bill RSVP'd, anyway. So Lana.
Okay, so I've had veterans in my program, and I taught a group at the Regional Justice System specifically for veterans. I think the first thing, I'm not a vet, so first thing I try to do with everybody is understand that the majority of people have suffered trauma, and we want to kind of coin that phrase of PTSD as being related just for vets. It isn't. I've had trauma. I have PTSD. Everyone here has had trauma and suffers PTSD. I think it's just trying to be humane and have understanding that people react to different things and have some compassion to try to work with people to help them to make the change, rather than for me to say, this is what I think you need to do and this is the road we're going to go, is giving people options. And I think, fortunately, we have great veterans programs in Seattle. So I do my little piece, and then the VA does their great big piece, and together we work together, and we can help. I can't resolve all issues, whether it's for the victims or the guys who have been on the other side of perpetrating abuse. The only thing I can do is give you options and think about things, and then people make their choices, and then that's the road I'm going to go down with you, because it's going to be different for everyone.
Jim, the challenge for a judge is to meet people where they're at and figure out what I can tap into in that particular person to get them to be motivated to do the things that these gentlemen did. And so from a veteran standpoint, it's not so much you're a veteran, what's your personal experience? We don't go into detail, so a lot of time it's trying to read the person, looking at what happened, how it happened, and then trying to get at the root of everything, rather than treating symptoms and making it quiescent through, like, for instance, we've talked about domestic violence as power and control, but what do we use in the court system? Power and control, do this or else. Does that sound familiar? So we as judges have to model the behavior, whether it's to a veteran, non-veteran, somebody that's a child that witnessed domestic violence that ultimately becomes an adult that does it. And so bottom line is treating everybody with dignity and respect, modeling that as a judge to whoever is before me, and then that ends up having an infectious type of process with the people, because if you model the same behavior that they're modeling the relationship with them to get them to do what they need to do, then all of a sudden you're reinforcing that's the way to get her done. And that's the worst thing you can do, regardless, veteran or otherwise. So
I would be curious, the gentleman up front, what was your experience in prison with veterans? Did you find them with a whole different set of issues, or with the same issues that you faced as young prisoners?
To me, hurt is hurt. It just comes from different avenues. My hurt came this way or his hurt came this way, but it's still the same hurt. It's still the same pain. You know, there's still the same drug addiction. Well, I'm a drug addict, but I only do so-and-so. He's a drug addict. He only does so-and-so. You know, so basically, it's the same type of story, but it comes from something different. You know, I got here because I had an anger problem. You know, I got here because I was in this war, and when I came back, I didn't get in the situation. It's just different avenues brought us here. You know, and the thing is, we don't never respond to something until we get into something. We don't never take care of something until we get into a mess. You know, I've had this for a long time, and I've never addressed it, so no one else ever addressed it until you get in trouble, and then now, since you're in trouble, you have to address this, because this could be a reoccurring thing. You know, I've met many veterans who are in prison, and it was the same issues. You know, I went to this war and it messes with my mind, so since it messes with my mind, I go get drugs. I take the drugs to calm down, but I got a girlfriend at home that's nagging, and so I don't know how to deal with her, so I slap her. You know, or I go to a bar and I got these issues in my mind, so the only way I feel better or think I need to relieve it is I punch somebody and I beat someone up. You know, at the end of the day, we all had these issues and problems that we all needed to get fixed. And a lot of us didn't know that there was ways to fix it. You know, until you run into someone like Lana who actually cares and says, hey, first of all, I want you to do to sit down and admit you have an issue or a problem. Second of all, I want you to admit that you're the issue and the problem. Third of all, now we're going to retrace the steps, and we're going to find out where it stems from, where it comes from, and then we're going to teach each other how to fix it, how to learn from it, and how not to do it again. You know, I think veterans, people with mental issues, people with behavioral problems, I think they're all kind of in the same boat. They just need somebody there to help them fix it. And it's sad because it takes a situation of negativity in order for it to be addressed. Did that help you a little bit? Okay.
You know, recently I met somebody, you know, just got back from, you know, overseas. And I had the chance to learn his story through another program that I'm part of. And for me, the biggest struggle that I had coming out of prison was people understanding me and my belief system that kept me alive all these years. Being in the gang, being in shootouts, being in all kinds of things. So when I was listening to this lady, she got back, she couldn't find a job, she was struggling to fit in the society, in this society, and in the neighborhood that she was in. So she didn't really find any outlet or anybody that could understand her, all the stuff that she has gone through, and so people was expecting her to act just normal. And I was so into that story because it let me reflect back on mine, because I always felt that no one to this day can understand my behavior. And so when I had the chance to talk to her, it was no different. The trauma that she brought back home, it was similar to mine in different events. But I think the key for that was that not finding anyone really to understand that part. And this other program were able to, because she ended up in prison. She ended up in drugs and drinking, and she ended up in prison. She did it about 3 or 4 years, and she got out to that program. And now she's successfully working for the iron company, making like $40 an hour. Now she's happy. Now she found the group of people that can understand her. And so from even just listening to her the way, and she showed pictures when she was deployed, when she was doing her thing, and when she came back all beat up. And again, it made me reflect back to mine, like, and even friends that I have that have come from the system, they have the same struggle. One of my I feel like that's my job to tell them, like, bro, don't expect anybody to really understand where you're coming from, because no one has been there but a few. And so try to find and connect with people that have been there and done that, and those are the ones that will give you the best support, because that's what happened to me. That's what's keeping me out here, if that makes sense.
Okay, so Judge, you're always so positive and always trying to think outside the box for help. So I have a question. The DVI panel works really well for an adult. Why don't we do one for teenagers and
Well,
let teenagers do
In
it?
2010, we actually did one at Todd Beamer High School, just like this, and in front of, for my street law class that I taught at Todd Beamer. And they sponsored the DV Victims Panel, and it was well received. I think the idea is, the work you guys have done with the DV Task Force and trying to reach out to the youth with the dating pamphlet, what I try to do is try to get people, especially young women, to discern. How do they discern these signs? And for young men, how can they recognize those things? And again, if you didn't notice, my questions were kind of intentional. How do you get it? How do you nip it in the bud? How do you break the cycle? How do you do those things? And so it's absolutely essential that through whatever means, whether it's churches, schools, whatever, that these kind of issues are brought before youth. So before it's too late as adults, when they're out of the juvenile, potentially now they're seeing me. Now they're seeing judges that Mayor Farrell practiced in front of. And at that point in time, the question is, it's never too late. You guys have proved that. But life is a lot better without criminal charges. Life's a lot better without even any kind of criminal stain on your record. So, but over and above all of that, life's a lot better if you're not causing pain in your relationships. But so absolutely essential. The question is, as a former school board president, it's frustrating to not be able to have it in the schools, but they're asked to do so much. So I think as a community, we have to figure out a different way to reach youth. And hopefully there's youth watching this, or they can watch it on YouTube later, that they can see that there's things that can be done to stop it before it happens. Prevention is going to have to be something that we push, instead of sometimes the court system. When we talk about access to justice, is about access to judges and lawyers. I just assume people not have to have access with it from us, because justice is something we live. It's something we're supposed to live in our daily lives and how we treat each other. And the only thing we can do as judges is repair. Rather than, I don't want to have to be a repairman anymore. But something tells me I'm going to be in business for a while. But the point is that I want people to have a happier life and not see me. So that's a long answer to your short question, but I think you have to reach youth and have to do it. How do we do it? I think we have to put our heads together.
We have diversion programs for kids, right? We have diversion programs for children. So why can't we as part of that diversion program, do a setup like the panel for kids talking about, because they need to talk about this. And this, it works for the adults. We modify it to, for the younger ones, and they run it. We just oversee it.
And I'm going to put Mayor Farrell on the spot because I think he could be an inspiration, and Deputy Mayor Honda too.
Great.
Why not have a way in our community to have a victims panel for youth because of your concern? And Mayor Farrell, and I believe you did sponsor that ordinance, didn't you?
That's right.
The ordinance that says it's wrong, that it's a crime to commit an act of domestic violence in the presence of a child. Why not augment that by having, and it could be done volunteers, by having those things in the community where as was mentioned before, that children of defendants who are convicted or children of folks that are victims can go to these places to learn. So things like your granddaughter, she had a way to be able to express those things, to learn about those things. And why not?
Yes.
Well, the biggest problem with that is, diversion with teens, she gets 3 strikes, you're out with diversion. So what has she learned the first time? We're not in King County, okay? We're in Pierce County, okay? So her first incident happened on school grounds. They kicked her out of school, sent her through diversion. Well, she's 14. She just walked in and said, I don't have to do it. You can't make me. Okay? Slapped her on her hand. Now she's got 2 more charges, both on school property. This time, she beat a kid up pretty good. And what did they do to her? Slapped her on the hand and said, okay, you have 24 hours of community service. What did she learn? She learned that she's got 1 more strike. She's got 1 more strike. She's going to beat somebody else up before she gets anything wrong, before they do anything to her. Well, that's not fair to anybody, and it's definitely not fair to her. I've been asking for them to put her into the 6-month program for teens, out-of-control teens, so she can go to school, because she's kicked out of school now. She's flunked the 9th grade. She's on her way of flunking the 10th. And she doesn't get to go back to school until January. And what is this going to help for her? It's not going to help her do anything, except for she knows that she can go back to school 1 more time, and she can get 1 more diversion, that they're going to slap her on the hand again. Well, that's not fair. And so something definitely needs to come out of the fact that they need to show.
And what I was talking about, and when they're already manifesting that behavior, then there certainly needs to be interventions that are stronger than what you're talking about. But what I'm referring to is before, at the moment they start, it's been established they're a witness.
Right. And
To get them before they get to a point where they start manifesting it in these other destructive behaviors.
well, if they would have done that at the beginning, it would have been different. But they didn't. They didn't even, she just kind of walked away from everything. It was like, it was no big deal to them.
But we have tonight, we've got people that work with at-risk youth, and we've got a wonderful mayor over there who's like, I can see wheels going, thinking, okay, and then Judge Larson's wheels are always ticking. They don't go to sleep. So I think that, between all of us tonight, we should be able to kind of get a conversation going because nothing ever just started. This panel that we do for every month yet, that just didn't, boom, start. It was, I believe, a conversation for some time. 2 years before we got going. So I think it's time that we, had conversation about how to do this.
So we also have Deputy Mayor Honda, and since I put Mayor Farrell on the spot, I'm going to put her on the spot too. She's a member of the Domestic Violence Task Force. Could that be a project of the task force, a youth victims panel, for lack of a better term?
It's beyond this.
Thank you. I think it would be a good thing to start working on. But we are having an issue trying to get into the school district as it is. So I'm not sure how we would do it, but I think there's a way that we could do it, and I think it's something we should start working on. I mean, I'm a little worried about our future. I'm worried about the future of the country, the future. I see kids out of control all the time, and there doesn't seem to be much that they have to answer for. So, but I think it's a good idea.
I have a start, and that is to, when defendants are convicted of domestic violence crimes, and it was in the presence, at least if it's in the presence of a child, amend the ordinance to include counseling for the domestic violence panel as an offering for children.
Quickly, Judge, I hope we can pursue this idea of getting into the schools. I want to say about 10 years ago, we were invited to do a not a mock panel, but a small panel at the Thomas Jefferson High School. We did it to the health class. The teacher at first said, this is no problem. These are all good kids. They've got good families. I don't think there's any problem here. We did the panel with a couple speakers that were very emotional. Priscilla, with a grandmother who lost her 2 twin daughters. Phil, who was a convicted perpetrator, gone through treatment. He spoke of belittling his wife and his kids. After the panel was over, it was just quiet. The kids came up to us in a third-party atmosphere talking about a friend who has a problem. How do we look for domestic violence? This friend is not letting me go to my friend's house. It was very obvious they were speaking of themselves or a person they knew quite well. So I really think it's imperative that we get into our schools somehow, even just to come to the health departments and do a small panel. Thank you.
Anybody else over here? Yes, sir.
Yeah, good evening. I want to thank all of you guys for speaking. It's quite educational, at least on my end. What I'm kind of looking at is that a lot of these people to get into these situations probably lose hope in their life, and that's probably the reason why they're trying to look for something. And sometimes they're not looking for the right thing. I think what we can probably do, and I see it from at least my perspective, is that if we have more higher figureheads, like the judge here, sports, athletics, where these people are professionals on top of their game, this kind of gives these people, more dreams, more hope back into their lives. This is something that these kids can, or adults can aim for and to achieve. A lot of these people that participate in these activities never go into an issue and hope, because they're aiming for dreams. So why not we have more of these athletics and these high figureheads spend more time either in a commercial setting or a school setting or all kinds of different settings that gives these different people more hope in life.
Thank you, sir. It's probably too early to mention, but I'm going to do it anyway. We're working right now to get, it's been 10 years trying to get it working. Todd, one of the high schools here is probably going to have coaching boys into men installed into their athletic program, which is, they do it at Garfield High School. Yes, sir.
I just wanted to share, I have mentioned before, I have the privilege to work with youth at risk, and I do that pretty much 24/7. I've been doing that for the last 7 years, and we just recently started a new program down in Kent as a prevention program for gangs and behavior and supporting education, academics. And, the idea of having a panel, I have witnessed myself, youth going through court for domestic violence already as it is, and they get a diversion, and the diversion is not necessarily intentional to that charge, it's just on behavior. But I think it'd be I could share more than a few ideas as to maybe how can we actually work it out. And, a lot of the times we wait, and we always hoping for money, funding. And, I strongly believe in community. I strongly believe on role models, like, all of us are here, whether you was the aggressor or the victim. I think you can be a mentor, to somebody to make sure, and that doesn't take nothing. It takes time. And I think when people is willing to make it happen, we can make it happen, as long as we all be on the same page as to what direction we're gonna take on, but I think it is really real possible, and I think it needs to happen, and it can't wait 2 years, 3 years. I think it needs to happen now, because I don't want my daughters to be victims of domestic violence. I don't want my son to be the aggressor under domestic violence. And then if we wait for them to commit that, then it might be too late in such case, so.
And we have the best people in here to help, and that is the survivors here. You have children, you know how to reach them, and how you can help us do this panel. I think a monthly panel is going to be awesome. I think it's something that needs to be done, something for the kids, for the teenagers, you know.
Speaking about the youth, I was volunteering with Federal Coalition Against Trafficking, which there's, some similarities right there. And they finally got back into the schools, worked on it just at the end of last school year, and they're now back into the schools. Sometimes it's kind of like the schools don't want to invite something in that looks like it's a negative behavior. So the theory is you bring the right person with the right message, and it's accepted. But I think part of the thing is that the school district is saying, okay, now this is one more thing for us. So the reality was, when Federal Way Coalition Against Trafficking got back in there, they said, here's our program, here's what we're doing, here's who's doing it. So they only have to bless something, then they're all about it. It's just when you're asking to add some more stuff in. So my suggestion would be somebody like you and some of these people to just go in and ask.
Anything further? Because I think we're at our, yes, Deputy Mayor Honda, just a moment. And then Betty. I'll do Betty first, and I'll leave the end with Deputy Mayor Honda.
I was going to say, a lot of times, like in the schools, what I see a lot is, and it's really hard, is when you go into a classroom and you see a child just tear the whole classroom up. Because I've seen this visually. So basically, and the child gets away with it. So just basically, the child gets away with it. There's nothing the teacher's going to do. They can discipline the child, but there's nothing they can do. The child gets suspended from school, but then the child comes back to school and does the same thing. Not just in the elementary, but in the high schools too, because I've seen it. And it's not good. So it is happening in our classrooms every single day. Elementary, high school, even preschool.
So I'm going to have one other person introduce herself, because she's a potential partner in the youth movement that we're talking about. So introduce yourself and say a couple of.
My name is Cynthia Ricks McEltan, and I'm the Violence Prevention Coordinator for CHI Franciscan Health. I'm also on the Federal Way DV Task Force. So there's a lot we can do. We can partner with communities and schools in Federal Way and do some of the programs. The Federal Way Youth Action Team has one of their programs, POP, which is also co-sponsored with MSC. It's actually housed with the Multi-Service Center of Federal Way. They actually have an MOA with the school district to go in and do case management for at-risk youth, because they're trying to stop the school-to-prison pipeline. So these are the youths we want to reach, because you would not be surprised to know, of course, that many of these youth have experienced trauma, and the microaggressions, the acting out, we call them microaggressions, it was because of their ACEs factors. What is ACEs? Adverse childhood experiences. What does that mean? Trauma, right? And so they're acting out. And a lot of them are in environments where they model what they see. Like you all have eloquently said, they're normalizing what should be abnormal, right? And so this is a way for us to reach them. So there is a way. We can tap into those existing organizations that are already in school and bring them the program and say, we want to add that.
But I don't want us to be the ones. I want to be the mentor to the teenager to do this, because teenagers reach teenagers. They don't need an old lady like me to reach them.
So, but so what I'm saying is the access into the school, just to get entree, is to say we want to do a DV panel with teens, a DV impact panel with teens, and make it peer-to-peer. So you start working with those youth that are in those groups, and then, and then use them, have them participate and do it in school. So there is a way. But what I also want to say is that the mayor did an outstanding job putting together the violence prevention, I'm going to just try to say it correctly, the Violence Prevention Steering Coalition, Coordinating Committee, right? Okay. Coalition Steering Committee. And there were a lot of recommendations there with respect to how to get to youth. And it would be nice to now look at those recommendations and say, doesn't a program like Lana's talking about fit in with that? And how do we now make that a priority, right? Because that's one way to address youth violence, which we have seen been on the uptick here in our community. Thank you.
Thank you. I attend the Federal Way Youth Action Team meetings, and there's youth there regularly, and the youth are engaged. So it could be a significant partnership. So, and last but not least, Deputy Mayor Honda will.
Thank you. So what we're trying to get into the schools currently is a dating violence booklet. And I don't know why it's been so difficult, but hopefully this year we'll get it in there into the counseling offices. If we could break the cycle of domestic violence just in one family, it would be awesome. But if we could do it in a community, it would be a miracle. And anything's possible. There's a lot of very committed, caring people in our city. And I'm looking at one right now, Janet. So we have a lot of work to do, but we're certainly up to doing the work. I'd like to thank you all on the panel for being here. My heart goes out to you with your granddaughters. I will certainly be thinking of you on October 30th. And I wish I could do something for you and for your granddaughters. Thank you very much for being here and for sharing your stories. It took a lot of courage. And thank you to all of you for being here and for listening tonight.
And thank you to Mayor Farrow, who made it possible for this to be televised. And it's going to be on YouTube permanently, even with all my mistakes. And so it's just very much benchmade in the world. And she's another judge. She was a domestic violence prosecutor also. And she's now been a judge with us for now almost 9 years. So excellent bench in Federal Way. I hope I'm okay. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.